Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is game 1 from the 2014 World Chess Championship match between defending champion Magnus Carlsen and challenger Viswanathan. Both players met in 2013, so this year around it's of course a rematch with the roles reversed. Last year it was Anand who had the title. Carlsen won that match, and so here we are, Anand as the challenger in this game 1, playing as white, opening with d4. Carlsen replying with knight f6. The time controls for this match are 40 moves in 2 hours, and should you meet that time control, you gain an additional hour on your clock, and should you make it to move 60 with still time remaining on your clock, you would gain an additional 15 minutes with a 30-second increment implemented, which means every move after move 60, you gain 30 seconds per move. Okay. Following up, we had c4, g6, knight c3, and d5. This was a welcome sight. It's certainly showing some variety here. Those familiar with the 2013 match, we didn't see any Grunfelds, and well, that's what we have here in game 1, this match opening with the Grunfeld defense. C takes d, knight takes d. One other note is that in game 1 of the 2013 match, we saw a very quick result, the game ending after just 16 moves. The game ended with a draw by perpetual check. How does this one turn out? What follows is bishop to d2, bishop to g7. It's worth noting that this is a very common follow-up to first play e4, and then on knight takes, we're of course recapturing in the only way we can. Bishop d2 looks to keep this pawn structure as is. By not playing e4 right away, bishop d2, bishop g7, and only now e4, on knight takes knight, well, we're there to recapture with the bishop. All right, following up, the game has black castling, Carlsen castles, queen to d2, and a lot of the attention will be focused on d4, at least for right now. A lot of pieces are trained on that point, both bishops, both queens, and, well, we're not finished yet. Knight c6, knight f3, both knights are also focused on this square, and this is a very strong pawn center, something that black needs to disrupt soon. And he does so with bishop g4, indirectly influencing this d4 square, looking to knock out a defender of that square. So white budges, white flinches, playing d5. The knight is kicked. He doesn't go anywhere just yet. First it's bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop, not the immediate recapture. This was an alternative, and on that capture, black would do well to immediately occupy e5 with the knight. Notice exchanging bishops first means that the knight now has to retreat, and now this is paving the way for a quick h4, h5 idea against the black king, maybe queenside castle. So, should this position come about, if white is to capture on this square, black does best to immediately make use of e5, and we could have as a follow-up bishop to e2, probably kicking the knight soon thereafter, maybe even queenside castle ideas. We didn't have that. In the position, or in the game here, after bishop takes, it is first bishop takes bishop, and now after black recaptures, at least the black king is now a little bit more exposed, right? We can expect some check along this diagonal, and black will be inconvenienced in some way. Only now does white recapture on f3, knight e5, and now queenside castle. So really, with this last move here, the battle lines are drawn. Queenside castle is certainly saying, well, we're going to be in for a good fight here. Opposite sides castling usually indicate that. Timing is usually a very, very important factor when we have opposite sides castling and we're trying to race and get at our opponent, looking to open files, moves like h4 and h5. On the black side, moves like c6, which would exchange off the c pawn for white's d pawn and have an open c file to get at that white king. Timing is a very important factor. It's important to note that instead of queenside castle, moves like this, queen c3, must be met with f6. This is the only move. I believe we end up seeing it played in the game, but whenever one of your pieces is both pinned and unprotected, you need to do two things to get out of it, namely defend the piece and break the pin, and the only way to do just that would be with the move f6. Moves like queen d6 are met with f4, and that's game over. Knight's lost. Okay, it's not queen c3, at least not just yet, but rather queenside castle, and now c6, looking to get at the king, looking to also crack at the furthest advanced pawn, the pawn that's in black's position. Queen c3, f6, the only move, and now bishop to h3. Now, this is an important point in the game, something I drew a lot of attention to during the live stream of this, and that is the move d takes c. What's wrong with this? This looks so appealing, right? This move here, queen c3, pins the knight, forces f6, and now after pawn takes pawn, aren't you winning a pawn, right? You're hitting the queen, the pawn's ready to grab here. Well, not so fast, because after queen to b6, super active square, hitting at f2, looking to simply pick this pawn back up. On c takes b, what do we have here? After, let's say, the queen recapturing. White is up a pawn, but notice with these past few captures here, taking on c6, taking on b7, the b file is now half open. This c file is completely opened. When we have these situations where it's opposite sides castling, a great weight should not be placed on material. You should not be so quick to want to hang on to all your material. Without this pawn around on the b file and or c file, these are now lines of attack that black can now be using to get at the white king. Ensuing moves of rook f to c8, rook a to b8, and black has a lot of pressure on the white king position. This is already a threat to pin and win the queen. King b1. Notice also after rook here, the queen needs to get out of the line of fire, that's for sure, and she needs to make a move that also defends this pawn here. Queen a3, there's rook a to b8. Again, this is very, very, very scary. White is up a pawn, but it definitely doesn't feel like he's up a pawn. It's just a lot of pressure. All the black pieces are really, really well placed. That's one of the reasons, in other words, why we didn't have d takes c on this move 15. Instead, bishop to h3, and what an annoying piece this is. Why is it so annoying? It controls c8, and it makes life very difficult for not just both rooks, well, not just one rook, not just like stopping the rook from a going to c8, but actually it stops both rooks from becoming active. As we'll soon see, this f6 move, it weakened the e6 square, so we're going to have the bishop planted on e6, and he really kills both black rooks. We'll soon get to that point, but first, c takes d, e takes d. This was a surprising move for me to see here. I was thinking rook takes, and then looking to double rooks, but instead it is pawn takes, a structural change, something, whenever pawns capture, files change in some way, so white now has this half-open file to work with, looking to put pressure on this e7 pawn. These pawns now look very ugly over here, being doubled and isolated, usually something you'd want to avoid. But they will be put to use. This pawn will push to f4, this knight will be kicked from his strong post on e5, and white will be able to have pressure against the black side. And again, it remains a mystery still, at this moment at least, how exactly these black rooks will contribute in the position. For as long as this bishop is there to watch over c8, it's very difficult to see how they get working. Knight to f7, a voluntary retreat, One other move at this point here was after this capture to immediately give this knight a kick with f4. And on knight f7, only at this point capture. One of the differences here is that by not playing f4 first, by making this capture, there is this move b5. I don't know how good it is, but it was a move pointed out by the computer, b5, because now on f4, this knight has a new possibility of going into c4. It was an interesting direction, a different avenue the game could have gone in. So, well, in the game it was pawn takes. We didn't have f4, just the immediate recapture on the d5 square. And now Carlsen voluntarily retreats, doesn't wait for this f4 kick. Instead, knight f7 right away. And now f4, watching over these dark squares. Queen d6, this pawn is hit. Queen d4 is there to defend. Rook to d8. And now bishop to e6. I really liked this position for white during the game. I thought that this bishop right here is just fantastic. I was maybe overemphasizing it, that you really couldn't put a price tag on him. He's just invaluable. He's really, really good on this e6 square, killing this rook, killing any of the black rooks from getting to c8, and even this d file. Like, this is a half-open d file for black. This is a completely open file for black. But this bishop really interferes with both of the black rooks getting active on the c or d files. If something other than bishop here, suppose king b1 or rook here, notice that this is a possibility, this e5 advance. This is one of the ideas behind black's last move, rook a to d8. This pawn is now in a pin, right? So this move here, e5, there is no d takes e en passant because you're dropping a full piece. So bishop to e6 simply puts a lockdown on any e5 idea. And what I was thinking during the game is that it is also paving the way for h4, h5. Keep in mind, again, we are still castled on opposite wings, and why not try to, if you have enough time, to peel open another file towards the opposing king. I thought that this was an additional idea behind bishop to e6. As the follow-up, it was queen to b6, black recognizing that there really isn't, you really have to get rid of this well-centralized white queen. Black looks to do just that with queen b6 at the cost of ruining his pawn structure. I don't know that this would be something that can be exploited here. White is still the better side, but how much is hard to say. There's maybe moves that black could be playing to improve the king position by way of f5, king to f6, inching a little bit closer, rook to d6, knight to d8, something that we do in fact get to see in the game, this knight to d8 move. Something that really changes the position tremendously. Having the minor pieces off the board, a knight for bishop exchange, and we'll soon enter a heavy piece ending. Anand avoids the queen exchange at this point, not wanting to exchange queens, even if it could damage the black kingside, or not the kingside structure, the black pawn structure. Queen to d2 was played, keeping the queens on the board and still looking to try and get at the more vulnerable king position. This here is a better home for the white side, having these A and B pawns still on their home square. These guys, not so much here for black. Given time, this h4, h5 idea and the opening up of the h file could certainly prove problematic for Team Black. So the queens remain on board. Having the safer king, you don't want to exchange queens. Okay. Rook d6 was played, rook h to e1, and now knight to d8. Initially, I was thinking, are you going there to double rooks? Well, not so fast. You really have to make sure you get rid of this bishop, just like white had something very strong early on in in the game around move 7, having that pawn duo in the center, having a pawn on d4 and e4 controlling a lot of squares. It's important to recognize where your opponent stands strong in the position, where exactly, what exactly is holding the position together very well for the white side here. And the piece that is doing that is the bishop on e6. He is, again, really making life difficult for both black rooks. He needs to be kicked. And that's what we have. Knight to d8. He's got to do something, right? Knight takes bishop is being threatened, and this is something that is allowed here. We have the follow-up, f5, securing that, securing the bishop on the e6 square, or lending some more support to the bishop, I should say. As a follow-up, it was knight takes bishop, rook takes, queen c7. Let me just back up here for a moment, because this is an important point in the game. I thought during the live stream bishop g4 would have been better, and one of the ideas behind this is to just allow the rook to directly see that e7 pawn, put pressure on the black position in this way, and at the same time still stay out of the way of your h pawn. I was debating in this position, is it better to go to g4 or better to go to h3? I thought about g4 just so you could get this type of idea in, and coupled with this threat of rook takes e7, I thought this might be a way to go. However, if bishop to g4 is played in this position, black has this move here, this simple little move e6, and we're going to have a ton of exchanges happening very soon. Just to highlight what's going on here exactly, well, the pawn is pinned to the queen. If bishop takes pawn, we'll have knight takes, rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and there's really not too much to play for here. If anything, I think black has benefited exchanging off the knight for bishop, maintaining a better structure and a more simplified position in this endgame position. If queen d7, queen takes, rook f7, white probably has to be a bit careful about exchanging rooks. Right? This would just be inviting the black king towards this f5 square, putting pressure on f4, something to certainly avoid. My main point here, the quick summary here, is that on bishop g4 we would probably have seen e6 and a ton of exchanges ensuing. Okay, it wasn't that. Instead of bishop g4, it was f5, knight takes, rook takes, queen c7, gives a check and defends e7, king b1, black gets their last piece working, white doubles rooks, rook takes, rook takes. One thing that you don't want to do is plug up this hole with a pawn. White always wants to be in a position here to recapture with the piece, because white wants to keep pressure on something. White wants to give some direction, or force, I should say, one of the black pieces to a defensive post, right? The black queen can't go wherever she wants. She has to now babysit that pawn on e7. So rook d7, black looks to have a little bit of a role reversal here. Instead of having the queen tethered to the defensive e7, black would much rather a lesser valued piece occupy that role. So rook d8 to d7 is the idea, and then that will free up the queen to do other things, such as maybe snip that h2 pawn at some point. It's also worth noting that instead of rook to d8, suppose black goes ahead and grabs on f5. It's not necessarily a free pawn. Notice how it does weaken the black king position, clearly. The heart of this kingside structure, this middle pawn, is no longer around if you are capturing. Yes, you're up a pawn, but you're maybe exposing your king to some threats, right? The rook can drop back to e1 and maybe transition over here to the g file, coupled with queen to h6. This could be a little bit scary for Team Black. Not a clear pawn up for sure. We didn't have this capture, but instead rook d8, queen e3, e7's hit a second time, rook d7 is there to defend. Notice if king f7, this is maybe inviting in some lines queen to h6. And I believe the king is actually going to have to do something crazy. The computer is suggesting king to e8. That seems super scary. I'm not so sure about that. It's reading as triple zeros with f takes g and then queen c4. That is way too crazy. I don't even want to touch that one. I don't even want to go down that variation. Too messy. I believe it's easier for black to mess up in that particular variation, so there's absolutely no reason to even consider this king f7 and invite the white queen into the position. You could stop your calculation right there, right now. Okay. King f7 wasn't played, rook d7, and now d6, a very interesting break here. Structural change, d6 hits the queen, e7, there's only one good reply. It's pawn takes, rook takes, and you lose. There goes your queen. So pawn takes is necessary, and now what has just changed? Well, not only the structure, but to be a bit more specific, f6 is now a bit more soft and needing some defense. It will soon be targeted, and in this case, immediately with queen d4. Very nice centralizing move. Pressure on f6, and there's only one good defense, rook f7. Black is crawling up into a ball, but is there to defend f6 well enough. Only at this point is this tension now finally resolved with f takes g, h takes g, and now rook takes d6. The material has been restored. There's a slight defect with regard to pawn structure on the white side, having 3 pawn islands versus black's 2 pawn islands. But is this really going to be enough? At this point in the game, during the live stream, I was thinking to myself, this is very good for white, and how exactly to make further progress. This is excellent place for the queen, maintain pressure on this pawn, very active rook. The queen is a great source to string everything together, to protect everything. A queen on d4 defends f2, b2. There's going to be a nice home over here for the king. There's h4, and the queen would be defending everything. Let's insert a couple more moves here. a6, a3 were played. Queen a5, f4. I thought during the game that h5 would have been a great way to highlight this position right here with the queen guarding everything. Nice compact position, nice home for the king, and still a little bit of an airy king position for the black side. The black side's king, Carlsen's king. Okay, we didn't have h4 in this position, but rather f4, looking to maybe disturb this pawn structure on the black side. Some ideas of maybe at some point playing f5. That's going to be difficult to get in with the queen around and the pawn. But maybe somehow to get h4, h5. I thought to myself at this point, if there isn't a way to disrupt the black pawn structure over here on the king side, there's not going to be much to do. And well, sure enough, in this game, these pawns didn't move at all. They stayed as is. We did have some changes, however. After this queen comes over to h5, this h2 pawn is hit, and white is now retreating by playing queen to d2. So she leaves her central post by playing to d2 just to defend h2. The follow-up was queen c5, rook d5, and this is where I started to see, well, maybe there's this idea now of playing this f5 advance, and maybe on g5 there's ideas of h4. I'm looking at ways for white to maybe change the structure against this black king position to make it him a little bit more accessible to the white pieces. The black queen remains very active, entering the white position here on c4, keeping pressure on the rook. Maybe even ideas of queen to f1, rook d7, queen c6, rook d6. White is not so quick, at least in this position right here, I guess, to exchange rooks. Well, I should say after rook to d7, if rook takes, rook, queen takes, there's this move here, defending everything. And once again, these types of positions, that black king is very fast to put pressure on the white pawn, the pawn on e4, the weakened white pawn side, weakened white pawn structure. We didn't have that after rook d7. It was queen c6, rook d6, queen e4 check, king a2. Now the rook ever so slightly gets a little bit active. Rook e7, no longer needing defense of f6 when the queen was on d4 and the rook was on d6. This was an issue. Queen c1 was a little bit of an odd move to see here, and notice the move list here. We're on move 38. A couple more moves still needed, roughly 9 minutes for Anand, 5 minutes for Carlsen for these next two moves. Queen c1 was played, and one of the top moves by the computer is king to b3, something that you're not going to see a human play, especially with so little time. I guess this is aimed at one day anticipating a queen exchange and having the king be a little bit more closer towards the center of the board. On the move a5, there can follow maybe even a4. As we'll see in the game, this pawn ends up reaching, the black pawn ends up reaching the a4 point, or the a4 square, and it becomes a bit problematic for white. White needs to be very accurate as soon as this pawn gets down to a4. I guess this computer idea with queen b3 would interfere with this idea. We had queen c1, a5, queen f1, a4. Both players at this point have met time control. Play follows with rook to d1. A lot of time was spent on that one. Good, maybe like 15 minutes on this one. The rook dropping back to defend the first rank here. Queen to c2, and this right here seems to be a very strong threat. The queen getting into that b3 square with check, and at the same time defending the flight square. And so with that flight square a2 defended, now there's serious concern of maybe one day a black rook getting to this first rank. So one of the white pieces, in other words, for as long as the queen is able to remain on b3 and controlling that a2 square, one of the white heavy pieces, the queen or the rook, will have the responsibility of defending white's back rank. Here's how white deals with it. Probably the biggest think in the game, for Anand at least, was this point here, move 42. This is what he came up with. Rook d4, very strong post for the rook. This is one of the squares that was given up with black's last move. After queen c2, she's no longer around to watch over d4. This does allow for rook d4 now, and the main aim here is to plant the rook on b4, which is a wonderful post. A rook on b4 defends b2, defends b3, keeps pressure on a4, and puts pressure on b7. Very, very nice post for white rook. Rook e2 threatens mate in 1. White is there in time to defend. If this check is inserted first, well, we're still going to be having rook to b4. So while black gains a tempo with queen b3, white will get that tempo right back soon thereafter with rook to b4, striking at the queen. So instead, it is the immediate rook e2, rook b4 to defend mate, and now b5. b5 indirectly defends this pawn. After rook to b4, this is being threatened. b5, this pawn is indirectly defended. Rook takes pawn would be met with queen c4, and the rook is picked up. There is also the move b6, something that I was looking at during the game, and I was completely blind to something. I was looking at this line here with rook takes pawn, and I had been thinking, well, there's now queen c4, and if you go here, there's rook takes here, and you're dropping your queen. And another thought I had was, well, at this point here, after king a1, you play to e4, and how do you deal with rook to e1 with a fork winning the game? There's also the threat of, if you're not going to win the queen, if she just gets out of that, there is check and then checkmate. So there's some serious threats in this position. However, there is a way for white to get out of it with rook b7. If king here, whoops, that's mate. And what else are you going to do? If you try to come over in this direction and eventually one day attack this rook that's been giving checks, as soon as you play to the d file, well, this is now a checkmate in 5. Queen d1, white is winning. Queen is now entering, mate will ensue soon thereafter. So this position, if it is to come about right here, with this idea of queen c4 and queen e4, this is in fact going to turn out to be a draw. But what I missed during the live stream is that on b6, rook takes pawn is a blunder due to this quiet move, not the check, but rather queen d3. And what is this doing exactly? It's setting up something similar, namely rook takes b2, looking to win the queen. And on king a1, now we have queen to d2. Notice the difference here. Having the queen on e4 compared to having the queen on d2. Rook b7, king f8, you still can't go here. Still the same story. Queen h3 would be mate. I'm showing you a difference here right now between having the queen on d4 opposed to e4, having the queen on d2 opposed to e4. The king could go to f8, rook b8, king e7, and now what to do exactly? After rook check, there's king d8. There's not this check anymore. Having the queen on d2 is stopping the queen d1 idea to give check, whereas if the queen is still on e4, the queen d1 move is available. So that's something that I wanted to just admit. Wanted to admit my mistake there during the live stream. Okay, well, in the game it was b5 that was played. Queen h1 looking to enter the black position. The rook comes back to defend. White gets right back to the center here, defending this diagonal, looking to pick up this pawn and maybe this one here. But after rook to e1, how exactly does white now defend against the mate threat? Queen to b1. There's only one way to do it, and that is to give check to the black king. King h6. You have to give check to the black king. Queen h6. King g7. Queen d7. Does this look familiar? It's how game 1 ended in the 2013 match between these guys. Game 1 of this 2014 match also ended as a draw by perpetual check. Players agree to a draw at this point right here. But what we can certainly call a fighting draw. This was not a 16 mover with a handshake. This one was certainly a big fight and lasted nearly 5.5 hours. You could probably hear it in my voice. It is a bit off. I will continue, however, to still do the live stream and the videos. This was a very lengthy game, 48 mover. First game of this championship ended as a draw, but again, a fighting draw. So we'll see what exactly happens in game 2. I'm looking forward to that, and I hope you are too. And as always, I hope you got something out of this video. Take care. Bye.